Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, August the 21st, 2024. So on Monday we had a supposedly very dramatic full moon, and this full moon was square Uranus, and there are all sorts of other things going on in the sky. And we had Venus opposition Saturn, and we had Jupiter square Saturn, and everything else. And looking at actually what happened on Monday, not a lot. Okay, there was this shipwreck, the Bayesian, this super yacht which got destroyed in some kind of tornado off the coast of Palermo, and this celebrated British entrepreneur was killed, and his daughter was killed. Well, we don't know if he's killed. Sorry, he's missing. Let's be clear about it. He's missing, and I think his daughter is missing, and others are missing. I think an executive from, was it Morgan Stanley or something, is missing. So that was a big event. But overall, this full moon square Uranus was a bit of a damp squib. The Democratic National Convention has sort of passed off so far without any great mishap. And so what do I say about that? I have seen some comments, BS for example, say, oh, nothing happened, I got it wrong. So if you actually look at that video, what I was saying was, there was actually a moment in that video, I was doing this video for Monday, and I sort of was looking at all this stuff going on, and I just thought, there's so much going on that actually nothing is going to be happening, because it is so anticipated. I was certainly anticipating it. Every astrologer saw this big build-up. Maybe the sensible astrologers were just looking at it in terms of spirituality and a psychic development and whatever, and of course you can't really tell whether or not that worked if it's based on psychic development and so forth. But I think this does highlight something in astrology which I have noticed, is that in terms of one's own chart and perhaps other people's charts, when you see something coming up in your chart, you see a transit or something big happening, you might have noticed it years in advance, and you've been focusing on it and you're watching it develop, and it just doesn't happen. But what gets you is the things that you don't notice, the things that are more subtle. And if everyone is noticing this full moon square Uranus, noticing how exact it is, then it's almost part of a collective. You have all these astrologers looking at this full moon, looking at its fact that it's square Uranus, the fact that you've got two T-squares on the same day. And it's like these astrologers are sort of bringing it out into the light. And when you bring something out into the light, it sort of loses its power. And I don't know, that kind of sounds weird. Although we should not forget that a full moon is not just a one-day wonder. A full moon does describe certainly the next 2 weeks, and the full moon was on Monday. I'm recording this on Tuesday, so you could say it's early days, but I don't want to make the mistake of getting caught up in cognitive dissonance and reminding us of that book When Prophecy Failed in the 1950s, about this cult that had decided that something big was going to happen on a day. When it didn't happen on the day, I think the aliens were going to invade, and there were going to be other disasters happening, and nothing did happen. And so in terms of their cognitive dissonance, how they tried to deal with the situation, they said, well, it must have been because we were praying so hard. And so there's a danger that as astrologers one can actually get involved in the same kind of cognitive dissonance. How does one actually bridge this gap between what one sees in the ephemeris, the planets forming, and actually what happened. How do you bridge the gap? So you say, well, must be that so many astrologers were aware of this that it just can't have happened. And so, in a way, I'm sort of perhaps falling into that trap. But still, full moons are not one-day wonders. I really must emphasize that. And we need to look at what's happening over the next couple of weeks. Though I must concede that so far, Monday was a pretty quiet day. And the full moon is now pretty much over. The moon is now in Pisces. And in terms of what I want to talk about today, I want to briefly talk about this yacht, the Bayesian, that sunk off the coast of Palermo in Sicily. I think there's only one confirmed person who is dead, but there was this British entrepreneur, Mike Lynch, who is sometimes called the Bill Gates of Britain. He was involved in his company Autonomy, which he sold to Hewlett Packard for, I think, $11 billion or something. It was a controversial sale. And so it's kind of a big deal that he's certainly missing. And I say, I just wanted to look at his chart and look at what was happening on the morning of the 19th. I also want to indulge a little bit in terms of me and America. Me and America. I'm not entirely comfortable in America, to be honest. I don't know what to do in America. I mean, that's part of the problem. I don't drink. I don't take drugs. I'm not into sport. I don't really find America's natural beauty particularly scintillating. I don't go on hikes. I mean, I'm in Washington State, I suppose. You've got Mount Rainier, you've got the Olympic National Park, but I don't know. It doesn't really do much for me. I sort of went through the Olympic National Park once, and it was just I don't know. I just got a feeling of bleak, desolate decay. So what does one actually do in America? If you're me, that is. And one of the only things there is to do in America is get involved in local politics, take an interest in local politics. And so local politics is what I want to talk about. And I want to talk about the city I'm in. The city is Lakewood, Washington. And it does have a chart because it got incorporated as a city. And I'm kind of annoyed with the city at the moment because it seems that they're in the process of, they're contemplating selling a road end. This doesn't sound a big deal, but it's an access point to a lake. And they're selling a road end to someone who is a Pierce County, whatever, he's a court commissioner, he's a sort of judge, I suppose. And one wonders why that is happening. And you have this contradiction here that on one hand they're prepared to give a piece of land to a Pierce County commissioner, Pierce County court commissioner on one hand, yet on another part of the lake they have eminent domain, a house owned by a dentist of Iranian descent, and he has he's served the community as a dentist, and he's losing his house, and the house is probably worth $2 million, $1.5 million, and the city only want to give him $400,000 or something because they claim that he's infringing on a boundary. Yet in this road end, you've got people infringing on boundaries, building carports on boundaries, yet the city doesn't care. So it does seem that you've got one rule for the one group and one rule for the others. And this man who is on this road end, who or one of the petitioners, who is a county commissioner, a court commissioner or whatever, and he actually was the person who swore the mayor in when he became a city councillor. So this seems to be that one citizen is being treated more differently than another citizen, and this really bothers me. And so last night I went to the city council meeting and I said my piece. You're allowed 3 minutes to make a public comment, so I made my public comment, and other people making public comments seem to be a bit nervous about mentioning the fact that a county court a Pierce County Court Commissioner was involved in it. They just wanted to look at the sort of the broad equity aspects of it and access, but I sort of piled in and sort of suggested that this was unfair, and I mentioned names, and they were very appreciative about that. But at the same time, there was something going on astrologically. So I just wanted to look at this little part of America that I'm living in from a perspective of astrology, looking at perhaps the chart of a mayor, the chart of when the city was incorporated, the chart of when the mayor became mayor. So that, you might think, it's local politics, it's boring, but it's where the action is in America, really. I mean, you think about Washington, D.C. and Congress and all that kind of stuff, and I know there's the glamour of Washington, D.C., but at the low level, at the city level and the county level, that's where the surprising things happen, and it's also very complicated. And so that's what I'm going to look at. Of course, first of all, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, August the 21st, 2024. Now, just a reminder, if you happen to like this video, I would be very grateful if you were to indicate that you did indeed like it by pressing the like button. And if you like the video and you're not subscribed, I would of course be super grateful if you were to subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, but it does make a big difference to the channel. So let's look at what is happening today, which is Wednesday. And there, by the way, in terms of the pictures we've got, that's a sort of snapshot of a council meeting. You can see American flag. I think that's a flag of Washington State, and you can maybe see the mayor and the deputy mayor in the middle of it all. And then, of course, that's a picture of the Bayesian, this yacht that I think it even capsized off the coast of Palermo. Bayesian, of course, Mike Lynch was a Cambridge educated scientist, and of course Bayes was a mathematician, and so a Bayesian approach to statistics and probability is something that is very common. It's the sophisticated way of looking at statistics, apparently, but I find the Bayesian approach, I do find it quite complicated. But anyway, let's look at what's happening today astrologically. So here is the chart for noon in New York. You can see that the moon is at 25 Pisces. So moon is in late Pisces. It's therefore going to be a day, moon in Pisces, where emotional matters can't be ignored. Feelings are going to matter. But the moon is quite close to Saturn, so we do have a moon conjunct Saturn. And so with moon conjunct Saturn, particularly at the beginning of the day, particularly if you're in Asia, Australia, East Asia, Australia, New Zealand, with that moon conjunct Saturn, there may be a certain sense in which feelings are being restricted, contained. We don't really want to express everything, and even if we do want to express our feelings, there may be resistance. So strong feelings, but strong reasons to hold back on those feelings. And the moon is actually making a number of aspects. So remember, we have this T-square Venus. There's Venus opposition Saturn. I mean, it's breaking up that T-square, but Venus is opposition Saturn. Venus is square Jupiter, square Mars. So there's a sort of T-square coming up. And of course, the T-square was one of the things going on Monday. People were excited about Monday, not just because you had a full moon T-square, but you had a T-square involving Venus opposition Saturn, square Jupiter. And again, that was another thing that didn't manifest or didn't appear to manifest. But perhaps with the moon making that conjunction to Saturn, this may be the moment when the power of this T-square starts to kick in. And so that's perhaps something to watch. So we do perhaps have a super T-square as Tuesday moves to Wednesday. And so that is something to consider. And, we can see that the moon is opposition Venus, it's square Mars, it's a little bit angry there. I mean, I know that the moon is conjunct Saturn, so that could slow things down a bit. We might try to keep hold of our feelings, but moon is also opposition Venus, and so with moon opposition Venus, we also have to be careful about overindulgence, and it might be a response to restriction. What do we do when we're feeling restricted? Well, we might want to do something which shows to ourselves that we're not restricted. Doing something overindulgent, spending money, eating too much, drinking too much, that might be moon opposition Venus. And moon square Mars, it can just be angry. There are things to get angry about. Now, the moon does eventually move into Aries. Now, it actually moves into Aries on Thursday if you're in London. If you're in London, it happens at 2 minutes past midnight on Thursday. But if you're in New York, that would be 7:02 in the evening on Wednesday. If you're in Los Angeles, that would be 4:02 in the afternoon on Wednesday. So if you're in the Americas, then late afternoon and this evening, you may see a change as the moon moves from Pisces into Aries. You may feel more dynamic. You may feel that some of the restrictions from the recent past are starting to ease, and there may be more scope for taking action. As far as the heliocentric view is concerned, it's always good to look at the heliocentric view. You put the sun in the center of it all, and now we see that Venus is exactly opposition Chiron. And I mentioned this yesterday, that Venus was approaching the opposition with Chiron. Now it is exact, and with Chiron with Venus exactly opposition Chiron, as I said yesterday, it may be a time when some of us have unusual views about the way people should be relating. Venus is the maverick. Chiron is the maverick. So when Venus is opposition Chiron, there may be unusual ideas about the way people should relate, and we're perhaps not going to want to relate in the normal way. And Venus is about how we present ourselves. And so with Venus opposition Chiron, we might want to present ourselves as people who are unusual, and we can perhaps adopt a particular style, maybe a somewhat unusual style, anything that sort of makes us a bit different. Though Chiron is also the wounded healer, and with Venus opposition Chiron, some of us may feel that people's reaction to us isn't particularly fair, or that we're not being taken seriously enough. We may feel a certain sense of separateness, maybe. And with that separateness may come, I suppose, a certain sense of some kind of wound, being a little bit hurt. I think that's certainly possible. And, we we shouldn't necessarily take this to heart. It's the way it is right now. Venus is a fast mover. I mean, particularly from a heliocentric perspective, does move very quickly. And so this Venus opposition Chiron is not going to last too long, and sort of by tomorrow the Venus opposition Chiron will be breaking up. So that is probably the main thing going on today, Venus opposition Chiron, and I don't think there's much else to really worry about there. But it's certainly an interesting aspect of Venus opposition Chiron. Okay, so now I'm going to look at the astrology for the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, August the 21st, 2024. Aries. Aries, in one sense, you probably feel that you can keep yourself to yourself. There's nothing perhaps that absolutely has to be done. And so you might just take the view that you can just watch other people do the work, or watch other people sort of exhaust themselves, because you just might take the view that you haven't got much energy left. And that would certainly be appropriate. I don't think there would be anything to feel guilty about there. But that doesn't mean to say that that is the only way of acting. The moon in Pisces does make a square to Mars, which is your ruler, and so that Moon-Mars square could make you feel a little bit agitated. There might be things that make you angry, and even if you are trying your hardest to be apart from the rest of society, as soon as something gets angry, as soon as you start bringing your anger to bear, then I think that things will actually start to happen. And so verbally, once you start getting angry, once you start communicating your anger, it may actually be difficult to know when to stop. And we're reminded here that Mars is actually conjunct Jupiter. Now, that Mars conjunct Jupiter was some time ago, but you can still feel its presence, especially when you've got the Moon square Mars, Moon square Jupiter. It just may be that you're minding your own business, you're trying to keep yourself to yourself, when suddenly something just comes up from nowhere. It almost manifests from nowhere. And you just absolutely feel that you've got to say something. And as I've already suggested, once you start communicating, it's very difficult to know when to stop. So that's something you need to consider, and I suppose you need to make some effort to sort of be in control and to kind of be aware of the sort of the psychological processes that are unfolding. And as far as relationships are concerned, I think there may be a certain strain in terms of relationships. Now, what's happening at the moment is that Venus is starting to make a square to Mars. Now, I think that square to Mars is exact. Is it tomorrow or the day after? But it's starting. And, Venus is less than a degree away from the exact square with Mars. And so with that square between Venus and Mars, you are going to be very aware of your relationship with other people. Even if you are apart from other people, you're still aware of your relationship between you and them. And you are also very aware of any differences of opinion. And there could be differences of opinion. Venus in Virgo square Mars in Gemini. That isn't suggestive of agreement, not really. particularly as the moon is bringing it all together. You've got moon square Mars, moon opposition Venus. So if you don't see eye to eye with people, okay, you could just stay out of their way. That is one possibility. Or you could decide that you do need to bring a particular matter out into the open. And I suppose if you handle things in the right way, it should be okay. Because with Venus square Mars, you do actually have a certain amount of charisma. And if you can keep your cool, then I think you'll be able to make your point. And I think that people will, in the end, appreciate this point. But it just doesn't take away from the fact that there is a certain tension in the air today, and you just can't expect things to just be easy. I don't think things will be straightforward. Now, if you're in the Americas, a reminder that late this afternoon, this evening, the moon does change sign. It moves from out of Pisces into Aries. And so with the moon moving into Aries, there may be a change. You may start to be becoming more forthcoming. And I don't know what you're planning on doing this evening. You may just want to go to bed, have an early night. But if you are doing anything this evening in the Americas, particularly of a social nature, then I think that things will pick up, and I think that you will perhaps lose some of your insularity, and you'll again be in the mood for engagement, and perhaps you'll be looking for ways to have an impact, remembering that as soon as the moon moves into Aries, it straight away makes a sextile to Pluto. But for most of us, this moon moving into Aries is not really, or at least for most Arians, the moon moving into Aries is not really about today, Wednesday. It's more about tomorrow when we really start to experience this sign change. Taurus, you are starting to feel a square between Venus and Mars. So Venus is, of course, your ruler, and Mars rules Scorpio, your opposite sign. So Venus square Mars is it's a dynamic aspect, and it can be about the way you relate to other people, and it can be quite tense. But at the same time, it certainly gives you a sense of your own dynamism, and it may give a boost to your sort of overall attractiveness, remembering that Venus is about sort of female attraction, Mars is about male attraction, Venus and Mars. So even though the square is a tense aspect, at least there is an aspect. And so, yes, there may be some dynamic tension, but this dynamic tension may be something that you can utilize, that does give a boost to your charisma. And I think that you're helped by the fact that the moon is in Pisces. I mean, the moon is coming to the end of Pisces, but the moon in Pisces does make an opposition to Venus, and that moon opposition Venus, it's a bit of a two-edged sword. Yes, it can create more tension, but it also, Venus is your ruler, and moon opposition Venus puts you in a situation where you do want to show something. You want to show some feeling to other people. You want to show that you care, and you perhaps want evidence that they care as well. And so that is good. But then on the other hand, the moon opposition Venus could incline you to a certain amount of overindulgence. I mean, not necessarily eating or drinking or anything like that, but just maybe emotional overindulgence. Perhaps you feel that there are restrictions on you emotionally, and you need to respond to this in an exaggerated way. So in certain cases, Taurus, there could be a temptation to show, exaggerated displays of emotion. And you have to be a bit careful that it doesn't get out of control. And there's no need to be a consumer. I think it could be a temptation, Taurus, to be a consumer, consuming things, buying things. But is it really necessary to be a consumer? Are you consuming because you really need to consume, or are you consuming because it's a reaction? And if it's a reaction, then I think it should probably be avoided. So do have some awareness of the underlying psychology of your actions, because it's not entirely straightforward. And as far as relationships are concerned, yes, as I've already suggested, in your own way, you're quite attractive, but at the same time, certain people could be annoying. In fact, you could be annoying to certain people. And so that is a good reason for being extra sensitive and for really sort of trying to pick up on what is happening around you, getting an idea for people's feelings and where they are and how they are emotionally. And so that way you're not going to make social mistakes. Yes, there is the possibility of making social mistakes, just saying something which is completely inappropriate or suggesting something that is inappropriate. And that's perhaps all tied up with the Taurian bluntness, but I think with a bit of sensitivity you should be able to avoid that particular issue. And as far as very close relationships, Venus is applying to that square of Mars, and so you can certainly feel something. There is an attraction, but it seems to me to be a somewhat tense kind of attraction. But maybe it's exciting as well. Gemini, I think that you're pretty focused today. I know that Mercury is going retrograde, but you are perhaps more focused than you were say a couple of days ago. And one of the reasons for that might be that although Mercury is retrograde, Mercury is moving away from the Sun. So a few days, a couple of days ago, Mercury was exactly conjunct the Sun, and you just couldn't see the wood for the trees. But now, as Mercury moves away from the Sun, things are starting to become clearer, and you can see the world for what it really is. And at the same time, you are ambitious. And, we've got a conjunction between the Moon and Saturn today, certainly early today. And this conjunction between the Moon and Saturn, I actually think is actually quite useful, because this Moon conjunct Saturn is going to be pretty disciplined. Once you decide you want to do something, you're going to be able to, throw all your energy at it, and you're going to be very focused, and you'll be able to sort of see something through to its final conclusion, and you'll be able to, in most cases, to separate out the noise. Yeah, there's a lot of noise. There has been a lot of noise over the last few days, but I think that you're going to be able to deal with the noise. You'll be able to, you'll be able to distinguish between the noise and the signal. The signal is what you need to be concentrating on. The signal is where you're going, what is true, at least what is true for you. But the noise, you can remove that and just concentrate on what really matters. Now, in the process, not everyone is going to be happy. some people might feel that you're ignoring them, that you're not paying them enough attention. But maybe this is a situation that really just can't be helped. You have got things to do, and Geminis in their own way can be quite selfish, and I don't mean selfish in a particularly negative way. They do have a keen sense of self-interest, and being Geminis, they're quite good at being sort of friendly one moment, and the next moment they're somewhere else. They are cold, reserved, they know what they have to do. And so perhaps you need to just handle other people in the right way, in particularly your family. You need to handle them, and you need to make them understand your priorities, and at the same time you need to give them something. Because if you don't give them something, they're going to feel upset. They're going to feel that they're missing out on something and that you're ignoring them. So it's a little bit of a balancing act, Gemini. But I suppose many Geminis are actually quite good at balancing acts. They sort of quite enjoy sorting out that balance. And I think that once you start trying to talk to people, communicate with people, you will find actually in your own way that you are quite powerful and you're quite engaging. So if there's a message you need to deliver, then I think it's a message that you can deliver actually very well, and people will appreciate it and understand it. And so, this goes back to how you create boundaries in your life. So just understand the people you have to be nice to, but at the same time they will understand that you can't be nice to them all the time, because you do have your own agenda. And I think that is the main point today, Gemini. There is an agenda that you need to follow through, and you need to give yourself sufficient time to see this agenda through to its completion. And that could be, that could take up a lot of your time, and you just might not have much time for other people. But in that small amount of time you do have for other people, make sure you use that time properly to provide the requisite level of comfort and reassurance. You don't want a situation where anyone feels ignored or undervalued. Cancer, it's a day when you are feeling, by and large, pretty comfortable, I would have said. I think that you're helped by the fact that the moon is conjunct Saturn. Now, moon conjunct Saturn seems to have a somewhat grim reputation, but maybe it just depends on your sign. I think for a Cancerian, a moon conjunct Saturn in Pisces is not really such a problem. I think it gives you structure, and at the same time it allows you to have constructive relationships with other people. I think people are going to take you seriously. And at the same time, you are going to take other people seriously. They will listen to what you have to say, and they will take you seriously. Yeah, as I said, they will take you seriously. And so relationships, if it's the right relationship, if it's a kind of relationship, where you're dealing with someone who really is fundamentally on your wavelength, then it's going to be okay. Because with that moon conjunct Saturn is going to give a great deal of sort of mutual respect. A mutual respect really is quite important. Though I think it's a good idea to sort of anticipate where you and another person might have differences of opinion. The differences of opinion could be about something which is really not particularly important in the grand scheme of things, but for a short period of time it becomes vitally important, or at least appears to be vitally important, but actually it may just be a mere triviality in the grand scheme of things. So don't be entirely complacent. Even if you're dealing with people you know really well, it's just maybe someone says something, maybe it's not you, it's maybe the other person says something that you disagree with, but you shouldn't, you should ask yourself, what is it about? Maybe you're worrying about just something that just that you shouldn't be worrying about, something that is, I don't know, it could be political, religious, moral, some disagreement there. That is a possibility. You know, after all, the moon does make a square to Mars, and that moon square Mars does create the possibility of upsetting the peace. You know, I think it can be a very peaceful, relaxing day, but that moon square Mars is just an irritation. It's a bit of grit in the system, and somehow you have to anticipate aggravation. There will be a couple of aggravating situations, but you have to be able to understand where they are, and perhaps you can avoid them entirely. I mean, you could physically avoid them by just staying clear of certain people and certain places, or you could just make sure that you're careful what you say and that you don't overreact to what other people say. And so I think that is, you know, quite, that suggests that, you know, there is a right way to behave, Cancer. And I think also some Cancerians may get a sense of something which is higher than themselves, something of a sort of a supernatural or divine nature. You know, that relates to in fact, to the moon conjunct Saturn. You know, because we can actually see Saturn, if you wanted to see Saturn, as God. I mean, that might sound a strange thing to say, you know, an extreme thing to say, that Saturn is God. And it's about your chart. It's not about anyone else's chart. I'm not talking to other signs, but Saturn in the jargon, in the ninth house, from Cancer, from if you make Cancer the first house, Pisces is a ninth house. So you could say Saturn in the ninth house is about God, and perhaps since the beginning of March, many Cancerians have perhaps been considering their relationship to God. And I'm not telling you what God is, but it just may be perceived as some single higher power. I think in Vedic astrology, correct me if I'm wrong, Saturn in the ninth is often connected with a single god. It's it's that, you know, it can be, if you like, that sort of the Judeo-Christian idea of God, you know, as a single figure. I mean, I think that's how Vedic astrology sees that. You know, of course, like with Hinduism is this religion that it's not a single religion. There are so many approaches to Hinduism. It can be polytheistic, it can be monotheistic. It just does depend on where you are with Hinduism. But I think with Saturn in the ninth house, Saturn in Pisces, it sort of errs towards the sort of the monotheistic side of things. Sort of, there is perhaps a single God. Again, please, I'm not imposing any kind of religion on you or at all. I'm just talking about your perception and how you might feel. And, you know, I'm assuming you're watching this. You're watching this channel. You're have some interest in astrology. Generally, people who have an interest in astrology also have some interest in religion. So maybe right now, it's with Saturn square Jupiter as well, the concept of the Godhead and what that means to you might be important. So that's perhaps something to think about with the Moon conjunct Saturn. But maybe I'm being out of order with this. Maybe I just shouldn't be talking about this, and it doesn't relate to you. But I thought it needed to be said. Leo, you're the Sun. The Sun rules Leo, and the Sun is entering the last degree of your sign. The Sun is about to move out of Leo into Virgo. You've got a day left, and the Sun really works well in Leo. It's, all things being equal, is the best sign for the Sun to be in. I mean, that's because the Sun rules Leo. The second best sign for the Sun to be in is Aries, because the Sun is exalted in Aries. So there is a big change coming up, and perhaps you need to consider now, in the next 24 hours, what are you going to be doing as in that last part of the Sun, of the Sun in Leo, part of the Sun being in Leo. What are you going to be doing? And perhaps there's an opportunity that has been in front of you for some time. Maybe it's been in front of you since the end of July, since the Sun went into Leo. And maybe this opportunity won't be around forever. Maybe it's about to go. Maybe today you have a chance to actually do something about it. That is a possibility. So if there's something you have not availed yourself of, it's just been sitting there and you thought, well, it'll wait. Maybe it can't wait much longer. So that might be something that you do need to consider. And in which case you have to be very realistic and down to earth about it. And for some Leos that might actually be difficult. Some Leos are feeling that there's something rather complicated going on, but you cannot quite understand. It's perhaps of a sort of a spiritual or cosmic nature. You're aware of these sort of higher forces, and the reason for this is that the Sun is opposition the Neptune-Pluto midpoint. So what that means is that, broadly speaking, the Sun is making a quincunx aspect to Neptune, 150-degree aspect to Neptune. It's also in the process of making an 150-degree aspect to Pluto. So that means that the Sun is on the Neptune-Pluto midpoint, and these Neptune and Pluto planets are these transpersonal planets, which represent this influence that is really very difficult to pin down, very difficult to describe. It's out there, it's completely cosmic, this influence. But how do you manage it? How do you bring it into your everyday life? It may be difficult, and in the process of you trying to bring it into your life, there could be some complications, and you just might get confused. So you might want to take the view that you should just try to keep things simple, and that you should avoid things that are just too cosmic, that are completely over your head, because they just could make things worse. However, if you are the kind of person that regards yourself as being mature and I suppose wise enough to deal with these sort of high-level cosmic forces, then maybe you'll be fine. Maybe you'll be able to actually harness the Neptune-Pluto energy and sort of understand where the universe is going and bring us down to earth and actually turn these complex universal realities. I mean, they're universal realities, they're cosmic realities, but you need to turn them into terrestrial realities down here. So perhaps, Leo, you'll be able to use your sensitivity, and it's not even sensitivity, it's more intuition, I would have said. It's just an intuition of what the universe is telling you, or telling you if you're up to dealing with a message. Some of you just may not be able to deal with a message. So that's something going on that you might want to consider. And talking about complications, the moon is still moving through Pisces. Moon makes making a conjunction to Saturn. It's making a conjunction to Neptune. So in a way, that's more of the same. Leos intrinsically like things to be simple and down to earth, and at the moment they are perhaps not simple and down to earth. And you can see the complications that other people don't see with these planets in Pisces, Moon, Saturn, Neptune. And it's particularly the moon making that conjunction to Saturn, making that conjunction to Neptune, Moon actually being on the Saturn-Neptune midpoint. So there may be times where you can see the picture, but you might actually be somewhat afraid of the picture, and as a result you might hold back. It just all seems a little bit too complicated. But the moon does not stay in Pisces forever, and if you're in the Americas, late afternoon, early evening, the moon does move into Aries. Now, if you're not in the Americas, don't worry, the moon moves into Aries tomorrow. But moon moving into Aries, in general, makes things easier to deal with. And so with the moon in Aries, you'll find it easier to express yourself. And things will be less complicated. So this evening, Leo, you just might actually feel a certain sense of relief as things start to simplify, and things that used to be very complicated are just becoming clearer, and you can start to see the bigger picture. And if you're not in the Americas, well, that will happen over the course of tomorrow, Thursday. Don't worry. Virgo, you may feel that you do have to take into account other people, and that's because the moon continues its movement. The moon continues its movement through Pisces, and the moon moving through Pisces is Pisces is your opposite sign, and so it's just difficult to ignore what's happening in the outside world. It may be events in the outside world. It may be people in the outside world. It's just whatever is happening outside your immediate sphere of interest, and things which you don't entirely have control over. And so these things are going to have an impact on you. And I suppose one has to say, well, for better or for worse. So we do have Moon conjunct Saturn in Pisces today, particularly early today. And I think you'll feel it more, for example, in Australia or New Zealand than, say, in California. And with this Moon conjunct Saturn, you're just going to perhaps be aware of the restrictions that people could place upon you, and that circumstances can place upon you. It will be clear to you that you're not an entirely free actor. But just because you're not a free actor, a completely free actor, doesn't mean that you should feel constrained. There are certainly things you can do, and perhaps what you have to do and what you're being encouraged to do is act in a way that takes into account of the constraints. All of us have constraints. All of us have to take into account other people. However antisocial and insular we are, we have to take into account other people and the world around us. And Virgo, you are no different. And by making a few accommodations, then I think that you can actually start to make things really a lot easier for yourself, and take into account other people's needs. And once you've done that, you'll actually start to see how much freedom you really have. And you actually do have quite a lot of freedom. But so don't take any one person or any one situation too seriously. It's not the end of the world. It's not a total restriction on your freedom of action. Though, overall, it is a time when you have to take into account what is happening out there. It just can't be entirely ignored. So, as far as close relationships are concerned, I think it's something that you're going to feel is important, but perhaps it's not a time for focusing too much energy on close relationships, because if you're with someone for too long, you might just start to clash with them. The moon, the problem is that the moon is making a square to Mars, and Mars is separating from a square to Saturn, and so the moon is sort of on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and so relationships could be very restrictive for both parties. And so you don't have to spend all your time with one person today. In fact, I think that would probably be undesirable. Now, a final point is that the Sun is now in the last degree of Leo. So very, very, very soon, the Sun is going into Virgo. The Virgo season is about to start. So some of your perceptions, which might have become a little bit negative maybe, particularly as Mercury is now retrograde, and Mercury is not in a great position really. It's still quite close to the conjunction of the Sun. But as soon as the Sun moves into Virgo tomorrow, things are going to change. You're going to feel a whole lot better, and you're going to feel a lot more dynamic. And the Sun and Mercury will be in different signs. Mercury will be in Leo, and the Sun will be in Virgo, and that is good news. It's going to give you more objectivity. So perhaps you need to start preparing for some sort of big push forward, where things are going to just become a lot easier for you. And soon enough, not immediately, but in just over a week, Mercury is going to go turn direct, which will be even better for you. But yeah, so it's really kind of quite exciting that the Sun is now about to move into Virgo, and I will be talking more about that tomorrow. Libra. Well, Libra, it seems that you may feel that there's a lot on you. There's a lot of responsibility, perhaps, that you're feeling right now. And you may not be entirely happy with the situation. Perhaps you might feel at some level that you're being maybe taken for granted, and that you're just not being taken sufficiently seriously. But as far as you're concerned, there are definitely things that have to be done, and maybe it just feels that no one else is doing them, and this sense of obligation may be somewhat onerous. At least that is going to be your first impression, but it's just important that you don't exaggerate. It's easy, Libra, to look at what is in front of you and just to say, well, this is difficult, that perhaps you're not being taken seriously enough. Venus, which is your ruler, is still opposition Saturn, and the moon is actually bringing this opposition between Venus Saturn together. So we have sort of moon conjunct Saturn, moon opposition Venus, and with those two connections, you can feel everything that is holding you back, and you can feel that there are just always things you need to do, and it just might feel just somewhat grim. But the moon is a fast mover, and it makes a conjunction to Saturn, it then makes an opposition to Venus, and it just moves on. And sure, there may be moments of anger, but it is a fast mover. So it's important that you don't exaggerate. So if you feel yourself to be a little feeling trapped, doing things you don't enjoy, then don't panic, and don't get too annoyed, and try to consider what other things are going on. And in particular, from a midpoint perspective, Venus is aspecting the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. So Venus has made a square. Venus has made a square to Jupiter. It's now moving to a square of Mars. So halfway between that movement, Venus is on the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. Remember, I think it was yesterday or the day before, we had Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, but now it's starting to move on to the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. And Mars-Jupiter is all about energy, action, making things happen, and this can be you. So if you are feeling a bit stuck, feeling trapped, sure, if you've got something boring that needs to be done, just go and do it. I mean, it won't take as long as you'd imagined, but you actually have the energy to move beyond the situation with this Venus aspecting the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. And you can completely move beyond the situation. And through focused energy, Libra, you really can change the situation round. And just, I suppose, don't add more things to your plate, but particularly out of obligation. So, sure, you've made commitments. You've got things you have to do. That can't be helped. What you don't want to do today is take on anything new, particularly if you don't want to do it. So you do have to be firm there, and I think that firmness is perhaps symbolized by the fact that Venus, your ruler, is making a square to Mars. Now that square to Mars is not exact today, it's exact tomorrow. Or is it Friday, I think? Thursday, Friday, it's exact, this Venus square Mars. And so with that Venus square Mars, I think that is encouraging you to be assertive. That's true. And at the same time, it probably tells you something about the way you're relating to other people. Not just any people, but perhaps the important relationships in your life. And so this Venus square Mars, there could be a clash, some difference of opinion, but you have to consider what this difference of opinion is actually about. And it may be that at some level, Libra, you are happy in your world. And that world might include having to do stuff which is quite boring and routine, but you're just happy in your world. And you might deny that. You may say you're not happy in your world, but at some level perhaps you are, and you are resistant to change. And so it may just be that someone comes along and challenges you. Maybe not directly, maybe through their example or through who they are. they're kind of making you aware that there is a different way of being. And you should be happy that there's a different way of being, but you may not respond to it in an enthusiastic way. You might actually see it as a threat. So perhaps if you do feel threatened or annoyed by another person, you should think again. Maybe you're actually being given an opportunity, or you're being given perhaps just a new way of being, which is kind of yours for the taking, if you can be open-minded enough. But Libra, it is perhaps up to you. And so in the end, we might say that if you're in a swamp, you can leave the swamp if you want. But sometimes when people are in a swamp, that's where they feel most comfortable. But you don't want to be like that, do you? You don't want to be in the swamp. It's not you. You're a Libra. You're not a water sign. You don't want to be swamp bound. So Libra, there's a way out. And in fact, with Venus aspecting the Mars-Jupiter midpoint, you can actually have quite a happy and constructive day, provided you just have the right attitude. Scorpio, you are, I think, taking yourself quite seriously. I think you were taking yourself quite seriously yesterday. And in terms of what this means to be taking yourself seriously, it just means taking yourself seriously as a creative individual. I mean, that's something that I think you can do. I think your creativity really does matter at the moment with the moon in Pisces, the moon in fact conjunct Saturn, conjunct Neptune, and we can see these quite positively. The moon conjunct Saturn is about you taking yourself seriously and taking your abilities seriously, and then moon conjunct Neptune can be about imagination. Okay, it can be about deception, but it can also be about imagination. And so if you're doing anything, Scorpio, that requires a vivid imagination, which allows you to take your imagination and perhaps sort of put it into practice, turn it into something real, what starts as a fantasy can be turned into a reality. That is certainly something you can do, Scorpio. And at the same time, you don't have to be satisfied with the usual way of working, and in particular, like the usual rules that people follow. And in some respects, Scorpio, you can be a bit of a rule breaker today. I mean, I don't mean disobey the law, but breaking the rules of convention. And you can break convention in a way that could be very healthy. You know, people have just got used to doing things in a particular way, and it's just been taken for granted. And then Scorpio comes along and says, no, this isn't the right way of doing things. It should be done like this. And we don't have to worry about the past. We can do things in a completely original way. At first, you might get some opposition, but if you keep going and you think for yourself, then I think that you can really accomplish something, and you can establish perhaps a new set of rules. So yes, you might want to break some rules, but once you break the rules, you've got to replace the old rules with the new rules. And so perhaps in terms of how you rule yourself, and perhaps even how you rule other people, you know, the set of ground rules, the house rules, whatever they are, that people follow, just shaking them up a bit. And if you change the rules in a very absolute, definite way, where you don't really allow much scope for discussion, then probably that's the best way of doing it. It's just so absolute, it's so obvious, people just say, oh well, okay, that's what Scorpio wants. don't quite understand it, but Scorpios must know what they're doing. And of course, that's a great thing about Scorpios. People generally tend to sort of think that Scorpios, yeah, surely they know what they're doing. I think in this case, Scorpio, you actually do know what you're doing. And so that's something not to be afraid of. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, Venus is starting to make a square with Mars. And this square is not exact at the moment, but it will be exact in a day or two's time. And so Venus is the planet of relationships. Venus is also ruler of Taurus, your opposite sign. And so when Venus squares Mars, it can have a direct impact on relationships. And I think it could be a little problematic if you are too into yourself. If you're too focused on yourself, you could put people off. That's true. But at the same time, there's going to be something very attractive about you, something almost desirable about you. And so that's Venus square Mars. And so you perhaps have to decide how much you want to bring people in, how much you want to attract. And you could come over as, yes, an attractive person, but also as a difficult person, as unapproachable perhaps in some cases with this Venus square Mars. So you perhaps have to manage that, and I suppose every relationship you're involved with, you have to ask yourself, what is it about, and what kind of signals are you giving off? What is the impression you're making? So do consider that, Scorpio. But overall, Scorpio, I do think that you're pretty charismatic, as well as being creative and talented. And I think if you handle yourself in the right way, I think you're going to be taken very seriously. Sagittarius. It's another day. Moon is in Pisces for most of the day, probably all of the days, certainly if you're not in the Americas. But with the moon in Pisces, I think you do continue to value yourself and the ground on which you stand, and I think that is great. That is absolutely appropriate. Though the moon is making a conjunction to Saturn, there's just possible with that moon conjunct Saturn that you perhaps take yourself slightly too seriously. You almost might feel that you're rooted to the spot, and being rooted to the spot is not a good position for Sagittarians to be in. Okay, they need to have a spot. They need to have their spot. Wasn't that I don't know if you read any of those books by Carlos Castaneda, The Teachings of Don Juan. And The Teachings of Don Juan was this sort of fantasy taking place in Mexico with shamans and magic mushrooms and everything else. And part of the concept, I believe, if I remember rightly, for a very long time since I read The Teachings of Don Juan, but he talked about a spot. You have to find your spot, and you're not going to be satisfied until you find your spot, whatever it is. And once you've found your spot, it might be a position in which you're sitting, perhaps. And once you're in that spot, then nothing can hurt you. Everything is perfect because you've found your spot. And so maybe, Sagittarius, you actually have to find your spot, whatever it is, with that moon conjunct Saturn. And once you've found that spot, and it needn't be a physical spot, it could be, but it needn't be a physical spot, but it could be sort of a mental spot as well, or sort of a spiritual spot. But once you've found that spot, it's like nothing can hurt you. And once you realize that nothing can hurt you, that you're completely safe, then you can start to come out into the world, and you know you're grounded. It doesn't matter what happens. You know you're in the right place. It doesn't matter. And of course, it all transcends life and death, doesn't it? Because you are basically, as I said yesterday, I think I was talking about being one with yourself, but in order to be one with yourself, you do need to find that spot. And so then perhaps you can afford to be more adventurous, because nothing can hurt you, and you can be adventurous, and you can start to actually engage with the world and realize what's available in the world in terms of amusement, pleasure, spiritual satisfaction, finding people who are on your wavelength. And I think actually that's something you actually can do, or at least something that you can start to do, is finding people on your wavelength. And at first it might be difficult, but as you move towards the end of the day, I think it's going to start to become easier. And this is especially the case if you are in the Americas, because late afternoon, early evening, the moon moves out of Pisces into Aries. Moves into Aries, it starts to make a conjunction to the North Node, and that's when you feel the last vestiges of fear start to disappear. Now, if you're not in the Americas, don't worry. Moon goes into Aries tomorrow. If you're in England, you're in the UK, it goes into Aries at 2 minutes past midnight on Thursday. As Wednesday moves to Thursday, the moon moves into Aries, and so you'll just feel sort of a new sense of purpose with the moon moving into Aries. And I think you'll be going to be helped by the fact that the moon will be making a sextile to Pluto. So that will give you, I think, Sagittarius, a great sense of power and also a great sense of opportunity. And you will start to see that it's not just about you. And there are actually a lot of people out there who share your priorities, as I think that you will soon realize. And I suppose you may probably already realize that, but I think the benefits of social interaction will become increasingly clear over the next day or two. Capricorn. It's another day, Capricorn, when I think that by and large you're going to be feeling comfortable and you're going to be in control. And today we've got Moon conjunct Saturn, and Moon conjunct Saturn, I would have said for you, is actually a pretty fortunate aspect. Saturn represents you. The moon is conjunct Saturn. It means that you're able to be in charge, and the moon might well represent another person because the moon rules Cancer, your opposite sign. And so with moon conjunct Saturn, you can have, I think, quite a strong and beneficial influence on the people around you. They will take you seriously. They will trust you. And they will trust what you have to say. So you don't really have to spend too much time explaining yourself, because your words will just have a natural value and authority to them, where you don't have to go out on a limb to be trusted. It's just going to be obvious that you are trustworthy, that actually you have a certain sense of leadership, and that sense of leadership is just clear, but it's not authoritarian at all. It's just a natural leadership, the kind of natural leadership that Capricorns just have, that they just emanate in so many cases. And At the same time, you perhaps also feel that you're in touch with something else, because what happens is the moon makes a conjunction to Saturn, and then it makes a conjunction to Neptune. And so with the moon making a conjunction to Saturn and Neptune, this does make you aware of other things, and you shouldn't underestimate your own sensitivity. I mean, sometimes I understand that Capricorns can be dismissive of things that are otherworldly, and I'm certainly not encouraging you to go on flights of fantasy, but you can just see things, and you can see the way things are moving, and I think that's really going to help. Now, one warning, I would suggest that you do always make your own decisions today. You don't want to be told what to do. If anyone's going to be telling anyone what to do, it's you telling other people what to do. You don't want it to be the other way around. And what you don't want to happen today is to have surprises inflicted upon you, especially when you might be asked, for example, to do something. And your immediate impulse will be to say, yes, I can do that. It just might seem obvious. Maybe a piece of work, giving someone some help. You just might say, yes, fine, why not, without really thinking. But everything you take on today, particularly when it's imposed by other people, it's different when you've decided to do it yourself, that's fine. But when it's imposed upon you by an outside party, that's different. Because you might, without thinking, take on something that you don't want to do, and perhaps even that you can't do. So all requests today should be taken with extreme caution, and don't agree to do something unless you have an absolutely clear idea about how long it's going to take and what kind of responsibility it requires. If you're not sure, if you're not in any way sure, if you've got the slightest doubt, then just turn it down. Okay, sometimes I do understand that sometimes there are things you have to accept. I suppose to an extent it depends on the situation, but in most cases, just don't allow yourself to be forced into volunteering for something that you don't, strictly speaking, have to do. Because you want to have a nice day, don't you? And you don't want to get angry because you're doing something you don't want to do. That's not what you want to happen. So that is a small warning, but I think overall, sure, it's not an exciting day, but it's a day when you have authority, when you're taken seriously, and I think that people will listen to what you have to say. Aquarius, you are in your own way, I would have said, quite sociable. You like being with other people right now. You perhaps regard other people as maybe being quite important in their own way. And perhaps what you feel is that you just need the right person. It's not just lots and lots of different people. You do need the right person, or the right group of people, perhaps. At least that's how you feel, in order to support you in your next, whatever your next venture, whatever your plans are. You do understand that you can't do it entirely alone. And I do think, Aquarius, that help is going to be forthcoming. And yeah, take advantage of what's available, particularly in a social sense. And don't assume, Aquarius, that people are going to be around forever. You might have got used to someone just being in the background, and if you want something from them, well, you can ask them at your leisure. But the sun is starting to move out of Leo. So the sun has been in your opposite sign for the last month in Leo. Very sociable sign, connected with relationships, at least in the Aquarius horoscope. But the sun is starting to move out of Leo into Virgo. And tomorrow it will move into Virgo. And it just may be that that sun represents a person who perhaps you need to talk to sooner rather than later. Maybe there's something you want from them. Maybe you need to ask them for something. Maybe you want to ask them a question. Maybe you need to ask them for help, whatever it is. But if you hold off, and you might actually lose the chance. You can't take people for granted. You just can't assume that people are going to be around forever. People do move. People do change. And so today might be a good idea to sort of catch someone just as they're walking out of a door. So that might be something that you want to do. Now, yesterday when I was talking to Aquarius, I was talking a lot about what you own and what your resources are. And your resources continue to be important. What you have, what you don't have, you do feel it. And it just may be that some Aquarians are just starting to feel that there's something you need. You've got a lot, but there's something else that would make things perfect. And it's perhaps time to give it some consideration. Firstly, ask yourself whether you really need it. Is it just something that is completely unnecessary? Or is it something that would really improve your life? And I could be talking about anything. Okay, I might be talking about something material, something you buy. I might be talking about a piece of knowledge. I might be talking about a friendship. But there's one thing you just feel you need, and it's where you feel that it just needs to be part of your collection, it needs to be part of who you are. And so this thing, whatever it is that you need, is close at hand. And it certainly can be yours, but you have to decide whether you actually want it to be yours, and whether it's appropriate. And also, is it going to be a case where if you take something, someone else loses out on it? And yes, in theory, you might be able to gain the advantage, take something someone else could take, but is that the right thing to do? Maybe it's a situation when you should just let it go. Maybe someone else needs something more than you do, and that is absolutely possible. And I've sort of talked about relationships when I was indicating that you perhaps haven't got all the time in the world. You want to sort of catch someone before they leave the door, but before they're halfway out, you want to catch them before they go completely. But in another sense, relationships can't entirely be avoided. Venus is opposition Saturn. Okay, Venus was opposition Saturn a few days ago, but the moon is bringing it back into focus because the moon is opposition. Now the moon is opposition Venus. The moon is conjunct with Saturn. And this does bring into focus perhaps the differences between you and another person. Circumstances will make it clear that you and another person are not the same. You have different priorities. Very different priorities in some respects. And now that you see that you and someone else are very different from one another, what are you going to do about it? Now, it may just be a question of vive la différence. It is good to have differences. That's what it's all about. Relationships, one approach to relationships in astrology, synastry, comparing two charts, is that one person should complement the other. I don't know, so if you want to use elements, if one person has no fire in their chart, the other person should have loads of fire in their chart, because that's a connection. That's one approach. That's a kind of, the differences attract. Another approach is that people should be the same. If people are the same, they have the same background, then maybe that's going to give the relationship the best chance. So, but today we are focusing on the differences and how you deal with individual differences. Are differences exciting? Is it about another person making you feel whole? Or are differences something that are just not going to get better, are just going to be an aggravation, but in the end, differences are going to bring you and another person to a deadlock situation? So that is something that you should perhaps look at in terms of understanding the various relationships that you're involved in. Pisces. Pisces, at the moment, you seem to be, in your own way, quite serious. You want to be in control, I think, and you're not going to want to be messed around. And at the same time, I don't think you're going to want to be confused. You're going to want everything to be laid out very simply in black and white, no flowery imagery. I mean, I know that Pisces is a very imaginative sign, and it does actually quite like flowery imagery in its own way, but I don't think today you really want flowery imagery. You want to see things for just as they are, and you want to just understand things as they are, and you want to be told the truth, and you're going to be very clear about that. And I think, Pisces, that you're going to have the capacity to bring people into line, and I think that you're not going to really be in the mood to compromise, and you may give the impression of being surprisingly inflexible, but I don't think this inflexibility is a problem. I don't think it's a problem at all. I think it's the right approach, because after all, we do live in a complicated world, and if people are constantly changing, well, really, we never get anywhere, do we? But I think if you are able to be solid, maybe a little bit inflexible, but very clear about who you are and who you're not, I think, Pisces, this will be very much appreciated. And I think there is evidence that in terms of your social world, that you are going to be popular. People will feel that you're someone they need to know. They're not maybe quite sure why they need to know you, but they just get that feeling that there's something you've got to offer. They're not quite sure what it is, but you're definitely that kind of person right now. And so, do consider what you have to offer, and also consider the transactional nature of any relationship you happen to be in, because the moon is making an opposition to Venus in Virgo. So Venus in Virgo can be a bit transactional, and I think it's perhaps reminding you that in any relationship, whatever its nature, there's always something that both parties want. To think that no one wants anything would, I think, be naive. And I think as a Pisces right now, I think you'd understand that it would be naive. And so always think, what does the other person want? And also, what do you want? You can be in denial that there are things you want, but sure, there are things that you want. And so verbalize to yourself what you want from any relationship, and also try to ask yourself, what does the other person want from you, and is it something you're prepared to provide? And because once you once you really understand what someone wants, you might not want anything more to do with them, but you just have to be open and honest and sort of upfront about it, and that I think is the best way of understanding what's happening today. Now, in terms, continuing on the theme of relationships, it's not the complete picture. You may think, when you look at the various people you're involved with, you might think that that's it, but there are new people coming onto the scene. It's not the complete picture. And I think this will become clear as the Sun moves into Virgo. And remembering, the Sun is about to move into Virgo. The Sun is in the last degree of Leo, and I think tomorrow the Sun moves into Virgo. And so with the Sun moving into Virgo, that does start to put some emphasis on relationships. I mean, there's already a certain amount of emphasis on relationships, but I think that this puts extra emphasis on relationships, and it indicates a new factor is going to make itself felt. But anyway, I will talk about that tomorrow. And that's it for the 12 signs. And I'm now going to see if we get a different picture when we look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was number 26, which is the taming power of the great. And what this is telling us is that we do indeed have a lot of power. It's true. We shouldn't underestimate how much power we've got. We may even have a newfound sense of our own power and all the different things we can do. It all just seems great. And certainly potential is going to really matter. But the taming power of the great, just because we've got a lot of power, doesn't mean that we should exercise that power. And the taming power of the great is telling us that we need to hold back. We might feel that we're just ready to go. We've got the ability, we've got the energy, we're just ready. But it's not as good as it seems. We're not quite as ready as we think we are. And the bottom line moves. And the bottom line moves, and the bottom line is indicative of an obstacle. Something is in our way. Yeah, we may be ready to go, but there's that obstacle that's still there. It hasn't gone away. And if we were to continue with our plans in exactly the way we were expecting it to go, ready to go, movement, we would just hit this obstacle straight away. And we're therefore advised to desist. We need to pull back, hold back, and perhaps wait for a better opportunity, or to consider perhaps what the real issue is. And the real issue is indicated by the next hexagram. And because we've got one moving line, we get moved to a different hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is hexagram 18, which is illness. Well, Greg Winkup, in his translation of the I Ching, describes it as illness. The Wilhelm translation describes it as working on what has been spoilt. So, we were ready to go with the previous hexagram. We hit an obstacle, or we were on the verge of hitting an obstacle. And what the real problem is that something is just not right. It's about decay, and something is in bad shape. Something we were relying on, we thought we could rely on to achieve our goals, to achieve our aims. We look at it and it's just not working. It's broken. It's malfunctioning. And when you see illness, I'm not talking about physical illness. almost certainly not talking about physical illness. And even if one was talking about illness, when the I Ching talks about illness, it is talking about an illness that can be healed. It's not talking about a terminal illness. It's talking about something that can be healed. There is a fix to whatever the problem is. So that goes back to working on what has been spoiled, which is how the Wilhelm translation talks about it. So if there's something that's not right, we need to work on it. We need to make sure it starts to work properly. Now, it's absolutely possible, even likely, that whatever this problem is, it's got nothing to do with us. It's not our fault, but it's just the way it is. Maybe someone's made a mistake in the past. Okay, it could have been us, but it could have been someone else. It doesn't really matter whose mistake it was. There's no point in going into a blame game here. We just need to fix the problem. And the implication here is very much that we can fix the problem. And once we fix the problem, whatever that problem might be, then we can move on. You know, it's perhaps I don't know, something is just something. Yeah, something could be broken. It could be something mechanical. It could be about the wrong relationship. It could be something very trivial. It could be something major. But whatever it is, the solution is at hand. So don't worry. And once we've found that solution, then we can start to tune into our power and do the thing that we're really desperate to do. So a bit of a delay here, but don't worry. Once you've sorted the problem out, I think that you'll be able to get things back on the rails. So let me now turn to this yacht in Sicily. It's off the coast of Palermo, and it's a big news story because you've got this super yacht. It was called the Bayesian, and it capsized. You know, you would have thought it would be completely safe. I think it was outside the harbour in Palermo. It wasn't like in Sicily, which, you know, it's not like in the middle of the high seas, but still there was a storm. It capsized. People, at least one person has died. People are missing, and I suppose once someone has been missing for a few days, one isn't really particularly optimistic. I don't know when it happened. I did read that it was first I read it was 5 o'clock, and I read it was 4:30. And I looked at the comments this morning, and someone said, "Oh, it was actually at 4:06." So, you know, the one group of people I do trust is people who comment on my channel. So I'm going to go for 4:06. My source is a commenter on this channel for 4:06, and I completely trust them if they said 4:06 was when the storm hit. So the chart for the storm, or when things went wrong, I've gone for this 4:06 on. I called it Bayesian, but I suppose you could say that's just when it hit. And so this is perhaps one of the few events that happened on the day of the full moon. You know, this day which was such a, I suppose I have to say, a bit of a disappointment. I mean, I don't want to advocate for disaster, but still, this was one of the few events that did happen. And so 4:06 a.m., August the 19th, 2024. And of course, the reason it's got so much the news story, if ordinary people get killed in a boat, no one cares. But if it's a super yacht with rich people on it, including this man Mike Lynch, who's one of the richest people in Britain, and you know, he had this company, Autonomy, which was a very famous tech company, and I think he sold it for $11 billion to Hewlett Packard, and he sort of went. Then I think Hewlett Packard sued him because the company didn't really work out as well as it should have done for Hewlett Packard, and so the chart for the accent. I mean, there's nothing absolutely immediate here, except, okay, there's Sun conjunct Mercury. exact Sun conjunct Mercury. Sun at 25:36 Leo, Mercury at Sun at 26:36 Leo, Mercury at 26:35 Leo. So yeah, it's pretty exact. It's almost entirely exact. The moon is quincunx. No, moon is trine Jupiter. Moon trine Jupiter. There's good old moon trine Jupiter. We always think that Jupiter's a benefic. And so what happens when the moon trines Jupiter? The boat sinks. And a boat capsizes and sinks. I don't see anything really on the angles, though. I don't see anything angular. Pluto is quite close to the descendant. That's true, but it's not exactly there. So it's not, as I said, it's not so spectacular, this chart. I mean, okay, what we can do is we can always look at the lunation before, but we've just had we could look at the lunation before, but we've got a full moon coming up anyway, so I'm not convinced that it's really worth looking at the new moon before this. But as I've mentioned, in fact, okay, let's look at the previous new moon. So the previous new moon. So this actually is interesting because the previous lunation before, so there was a new moon on August the 4th at 12:34 Leo, and so the previous new moon was exactly on the midheaven in Palermo, exactly on the midheaven in Palermo. Now there would have been a lot of places where the new moon would have been exactly on the midheaven, but it does seem that that put Palermo in the public eye, put this part of the world in the public eye, and this is perhaps the stress point. It all happened in Palermo, but I'm not saying in itself that is particularly spectacular. But what about the most famous person on board, Mike Lynch? So here is Mike Lynch's chart. Don't have his time of birth, June 16th, 1965. It was his Saturn return. So he has just turned 59, and his Saturn is at 1706 Pisces. And so if we compare the two charts, we put Mike Lynch's chart in the middle, and we put the sinking on the outer wheel. There is his Saturn. Saturn is moving towards his Saturn. So the Saturn return is not exact. And I suppose this is a reminder that Saturn returns, they can take many forms. Very often, absolutely nothing happens during a Saturn return. The second Saturn return, we have our first Saturn return at around 29. The second Saturn return in our late 50s. Saturn hit his Saturn. So, okay, that's something. But why then? Why would a Saturn return have caused him so much damage? Well, I think we do actually have to look at the condition of his Saturn. So his Saturn is at 1706 Pisces. So you look at these three planets opposite Saturn. So he's got that mid-60s Uranus-Pluto conjunction. But look at Mars. He's got Mars at 24 Virgo, Uranus at 11 Virgo. So if we want to work out the midpoint of Mars and Uranus, well, that's quite simple. We add the position of Mars to the position of Uranus. So we add Mars and Uranus together. And that gives us 35.5 Virgo. Then we divide by 2, and that gives us 1731 Virgo. So Saturn was exactly on his Mars. Transiting Saturn was exactly on his Mars-Uranus midpoint, exactly. And his natal Saturn is on his Mars-Uranus midpoint. So here is someone who's got Saturn on the Mars-Uranus midpoint in his natal chart. And how does he use it? Well, I suppose Mars-Uranus could be associated with technology. It could be associated with all his legal issues that he's been having. I think he was in danger of being sent to prison for a very long time in the US at one stage, but the jury acquitted him. And I think as a result of a Hewlett-Packard deal, where it felt that that perhaps it was felt that his reporting of the financial condition of a financial position of autonomy was not as perhaps clear as it should have been. But so that could be Saturn opposition Mars-Uranus, just all these sort of legal aggravation that he's been having for over 10 years. I think he just got out of these legal things. So he sorted out this legal issue, and then he dies, or certainly he's missing. And so Saturn, he has Saturn on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, and then Saturn triggers this aspect in his chart, Saturn on the Mars-Uranus, and that can be about an accident. I mean, let me just tell you what Vita says about Saturn on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. He says, sudden stop or interruption of one's work, violent separation. I mean, that's Vita. Saturn on the Mars-Uranus. Ebertin says, extraordinary and unusual powers of resistance, the ability to give as well as to take under provocation, the inclination to apply brute force. I mean, maybe this says something about his business. A test of nervous strength, intervention by higher power or providence, a sudden illness, a sudden accident, separation or case of death. And I think that Ebertin has kind of got the flavour of that Saturn on his Mars-Uranus midpoint very well. And yes, transiting Saturn was on his Mars-Uranus midpoint as well. So this is perhaps telling us something about our astrological practice. So if we've got someone with a Saturn return coming up, for example, or some other big transit, don't just look at Saturn and its houses. Try and look at what midpoints Saturn is on, and that might just give you a clue about how the transit exactly is working. Now, one interesting coincidence is that he wasn't the only person who went to trial in the United States. Someone else went with him, who was also on trial. Someone else who was working with Autonomy Internet. And this man was Stephen Chamberlain. Now, I don't have Stephen Chamberlain's chart, but I do have a chart for when he was killed in a road accident. And he was killed in a road accident on Saturday. So you've got these two people who were being charged with very serious crimes in the US. Both were acquitted. So we have Mike Lynch dies in an accident on August the 19th, 2024, or certainly he's missing. We don't know he's dead. And then someone he was working with, a colleague from Autonomy, 2 days earlier, dies in a car accident. That's just weird, isn't it? I don't have Stephen Chamberlain's chart, but this is a chart for the accident, and I suppose you've got the South Node conjunct the Ascendant, and so that's interesting, isn't it? Did it somehow have to happen? And something returning? I don't know. That is, I suppose, possible. One has to consider what was going on with Stephen Chamberlain, and how did it impact Mike Lynch. So Mike Lynch, here's Mike Lynch's chart in this center wheel. Notice Mike Lynch has moon in Capricorn, and we can be fairly sure that he's got moon in Capricorn. And so we don't know what time he was born. His moon would have been anywhere between, I don't know, 15 Capricorn and 26 Capricorn. But it was around the time of his lunar return that this accident happened. So his lunar return would certainly have been interesting. I mean, I'm not saying that it's particularly dramatic. You might see that the accident, Black Moon Lilith was sort of square his sun, and sort of Venus was conjunct his Pluto. I mean, nothing particularly dramatic, I would have said. But, when you do have two people dying so quickly who are both associated with the same thing, one wonders, what are we being told? It was time for them to go, certainly. The universe takes people away when the universe decides that is the right thing to do. Okay, so now I want to look at the city I'm in. I'm in the city of Lakewood, which is in western Washington state on the Pacific. And I've been having issues with the city. At least I find the city's approach, as I've said at the beginning, they seem to be treating one group of citizens differently than another. And someone who is a Pierce County court, the reason I say Pierce County is a county in Washington state, and Lakewood is in Pierce County. And Pierce County, there is a Pierce County Court Commissioner who wants to take over a piece of land next to a lake, and he's already built and he's one of the petitioners, and he's petitioned to do this. And I mean, he has all sorts of reasons. He says there's crime and people are messing around with his messing around close to his property and making his life miserable. But the strange thing is that there were a group of people on another part of the lake who had exactly the same issue, but the city council was basically ignoring them. They wanted to develop a park, and the park already had issues with crime, but the city were quite happy to move ahead. They didn't really care too much about the complaints of one group of residents about crime and so forth. But with this resident, the mayor clearly said, "Oh well, poor man. He's got all these issues, and he's got problems with crime and whatever. So clearly, the solution is we'll sell him the land next to the lake. And this is an access point. It's called Lakewood, and this seems to be a bit weird. How one citizen is treated differently from another, and matters were made worse by the fact that there's a dentist from Iran who originally from Iran, who served the community, and he had this big house on the lake, and the city claimed that he was encroaching on city property, and this house was worth, I don't know, $1.5 million or something. And the city offered him to begin with $250,000 because they said he was encroaching on city land. That's not. We don't know that for sure. He's contesting that in court. Yet, in this place that is being vacated, we have a carport encroaching on city land. We have part of a house encroaching on city land, but the city doesn't seem to care. And it's this problem here that this man who who is a judge. And the city everything's fine with him. The city seems to be quite prepared to give him the land, or sell it to him, of course. But yet, this Iranian dentist is treated like trash by the city. So there is a certain problem here, and this is something that I find to be of concern. And so I made this. I went to the city council. I like to make public comments at the city council, and so I made my public comment. So, of course, I need to make this relevant to astrology. So you can look at the chart of a city. So let's look at the chart of the city. So here's a chart of the city. I mean, I'm not going to spend long on this chart. So this is when the city was incorporated. I don't know what time it was incorporated, but it was incorporated February the 28th, 1996. And notice that Saturn is in Pisces, so the city will have its Saturn return soon. Notice also Jupiter in Capricorn. Jupiter in Capricorn opposition the moon. Jupiter in Capricorn for incorporation of a city is a bit of a problem, because Jupiter in Capricorn does indicate, it's fallen. Jupiter's fallen in Capricorn, and the moon is the moon in Cancer opposition to Jupiter in Capricorn. Moon in Cancer, you could say, this concern about community. Americans like to go on and on about community and how great the community is, but it's opposition Jupiter in Capricorn. You've got this constant conflict between the community and self-interest. Developers, pressure groups, people who want to take advantage of every situation they can. And that's a common issue in, I suppose, every American city. But in the case of Lakewood, I think it really is very much true. And this city is a Pisces. It never takes responsibility for anything. They always say it's other people's fault. It's not their fault. And to a certain extent, that is true. They can't change facts about, state rules. State rules do impact the city. That's true. State rules, I don't know, they complain about, the police are not allowed to stop speeding cars because of state rules. If someone is on going at 100 miles an hour and the police can't go in hot pursuit unless there's a violent crime, that's a problem. But it's always this claim, but it's always other people's fault. They have to destroy pristine habitats. Because we have to do it, because of affordable high housing, we have to do it, and there's no one taking responsibility, and that can be how Pisces works. Sun and Mars in Pisces, Saturn in Pisces. It's all sort of a bit all over the place. But I think the city will be having its Saturn return soon, and the city has a mayor, so you can look at the horoscope of the mayor. The mayor is now the mayor was sworn in as a councillor on January the 3rd, 2022, and so and he was sworn in by this man Clinton P. Johnson, and Clinton P. Johnson is also the man who is trying to take over this property, this road end right next to the lake. So you have this issue there of there's a conflict of interest there, and the mayor freely acknowledged that Clinton P. Johnson is a friend of his. So there's a real problem here. There's a real problem of objectivity. So here's the mayor's horoscope. I got this on his Facebook. He was talking around June the 18th about him being his birthday. So here's the mayor's chart. I don't have an ascendant for him. The mayor would never give me his time of birth, but not that I'd ask him. But here's the mayor's chart. I don't know. That's actually the chart for when he became mayor. So here's the chart of the mayor. You can see the mayor is a Gemini. I think he was born January the 18th, 1963. Maybe it's sort of day out there. So here's his chart. And he's a lawyer, and they often are, aren't they? And there is, I suppose you could say, Mercury square Mars, Mercury and Gemini square Mars. I suppose that might mean a lawyer. But it's also someone who gets annoyed, and that's Mercury, Venus square Mars, and Mars conjunct Pluto. So clearly this mayor has an agenda, that's for sure. And he's probably he's into his power, but you have to think he's 61 years old, he's mayor of Lakewood. You don't really go much further on the political ladder once you've hit mayor of Lakewood. That's probably about it. And so he did try for some other higher office, but he failed. So There's his Venus square Mars, Mars conjunct Pluto, and from an elemental point of view, he's got no personal planets in water. And I thought that was quite interesting because he perhaps has limited empathy. I think he's very good at empathizing with people he knows, his friend, Clinton P. Johnson, this judge who wants to take over this land. He empathizes with some group people in Lakewood, but he doesn't empathize with others. He empathizes perhaps with his group of people he can relate to, people he perhaps aspires to. But he certainly doesn't seem to empathize with the Iranian dentist who's been completely drained emotionally and financially by losing his house. He doesn't know empathy there. He empathizes with one victim of crime, but he doesn't empathize with another victim of crime. So it's a very focused kind of empathy. And indeed, he doesn't have any water in his chart. He doesn't have any personal planets in water. He does have Moon in Taurus. I think that he's someone who he likes for good things in life. He likes to go on holiday to Hawaii and when he has pictures, he likes to have pictures of himself holding a glass of wine when in Hawaii, I think he's just been to France on holiday, and he likes to go to Italy on holiday. He likes to travel. He likes the accoutrements of wealth. I don't know how wealthy he is. You can see his financial details online. The usual stuff. $500, something like $500 a month on the car, on paying off the car loan, all that kind of thing. I can't believe that he's a super successful lawyer, because he's now just taken a job as city lawyer for another city, and not Lakewood. So that seems a little bit humiliating. I would have thought, being a city lawyer. It's sometimes said that the best lawyers in America don't become city lawyers, but I think that his Moon in Taurus, he does like to think good things in life, and perhaps he just likes connections, and that's perhaps the way it is, to sort of hobnob with the people with power and influence. So that's his chart, and then we have the moment he became mayor. So that would be so the moment he became mayor was this one. I actually do have the ascendant for that, actually. So let's change this. So this is the moment he became mayor. Was January the 3rd, 2022 at 7:06 p.m. And I would not have said this is a great time to be mayor, would you? I mean, if you look at this, he's got the ascendant was at 14 degrees Leo, and the moon was we had Saturn exactly on the 7th house cusp, and so we had the Saturn-Uranus square. Remember, that was the Saturn-Uranus square. This was just before Russia invaded Ukraine, and the moon is applying to a square of Uranus and a conjunction to Saturn, but it doesn't seem to be a particularly happy chart for him to become mayor, and perhaps we need to be looking at transits to it. Then there's me. Why am I bothered by it? Because I'm in there. So I made my public comment yesterday. That's what I did. Other people weren't. They were sort of holding back. They didn't want to mention the fact that there was a Pierce County court, a Pierce County court commissioner involved in it. They wanted to sort of just focus on the other fact. But I'm an outsider, and I just went for it. But I do make my public comments every couple of weeks. And so there's my chart. And here is the chart for when I made my public comment. So there's my there's a chart for me when. So if you compare the two charts, this makes me really angry, and I almost feel that I want to start building up a YouTube channel just on this city and what the city is doing. I feel quite inspired to do that at the moment. And so looking at what was happening to me, there you can see my Mercury. It's all about my Mercury, isn't it? Sorry, that's not the right chart at all. Sorry. It's all about my Mercury. So I'm sorry about my chart, about talking about my chart, but there you go. You see, you don't really see me as having Mars rising, but I do have Mars rising, and when I get annoyed about something, I can dig my heels in, I suppose. And so my Mercury is at 1953 Gemini, and so you can see that Mars was exactly conjunct my Mercury last night. Well, when I say last night, that means Monday night. On Monday night, Mars was conjunct my Mercury, and Mars was semi-square my ascendant, and what else? The ascendant at the time I started making my public comment was 19 Aquarius, and so the ascendant was trine my Mercury. I mean, it seemed to go okay, my public comment, and in terms of what I was told by people listening to this, it wasn't. I mean, I had to read it out, because the thing is, making public comments, you only have 3 minutes. So I'd like to do it off the cuff, but the trouble is, if you've only got 3 minutes, you can't do it off the cuff. And if you've got something really important to say and you want to get all your points in order, then you have to write it out. So that's a bit of a pain. But so that's me, and something's made me annoyed, and I feel that today I want to create a YouTube video about what happened and to describe it, and hopefully, I don't know, maybe get local press and TV channels interested in it, because I just feel right now, I really want to get the mayor. I really do. That's just what my feeling. That's what it feels like. I really want to get the mayor. I was able to get up straight away this morning because I was suddenly, first thing I thought about, I want to get the mayor. That's my feeling at the moment. I want to do something. And so those are my feelings at the moment. So I'm sorry to talk about myself. But I kind of want to show you how you can perhaps use astrology to look at local politics. And there are charts around. You can look at the chart of the mayor. You can look at the chart of the city. You can look at the chart of the city of when a mayor becomes a mayor. It all gives you a picture, perhaps. So So I hope you didn't find all of that too indulgent. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.